I'd truly like to thank you and the Rabbi of the Western Wall, who has honored us with his presence and comes straight from the airport. And I truly am grateful for that. Rabbi Shmuel Rabinowitz is well known. One barely needs to actually even introduce him. He's of the Western Wall and the Holy Sites, and he was appointed in 1995. And since 2000, he has also been the Rabbi of the Western Wall. And so on issues of statesmanship and religious issues, I think that you have a role upon your shoulders to truly represent those opinions here. I only heard part of what was said, and I think that the Israel Antiquities Authority should have been represented here at this convention. So much was said that I do believe they would have been able to answer, because those things do not reflect reality. But I will present the actual fund for the heritage of the Western Wall, which I had as my terms of reference. It is a government fund, and although there have been claims against it to such a degree that I very often need bodyguards actually protecting me, because people think that I do not meet the needs, and they think that the Western Wall ought to look like this or that. But any public official who wants to answer to the maximum degree and meet and look upon things with a very broad overview. I feel somewhat alone taking this stand, but I do believe that we need to truly investigate very deeply the encounter between the sacred and archaeology, because there's nothing against those approaches, but rather watching them as they are in their encounter together. And for those who go to the Western Wall every single day, they see those who come to visit it. And I'd like to tell you about this rather unique encounter between sanctity, the sacred elements, and archaeology as they are manifest at the Western Wall. And as a religious person, I truly do appreciate all those who are involved in archaeology. They're so enthusiastic and passionate with their professional knowledge, and they invest so much of that enthusiasm in order to truly excavate the past. They never ignore any periods of history or any eras, but they try to do so across the board in history and supply answers to a maximum, the biggest picture possible for those who come and visit the Western Wall. And I would like here to express my vote of gratitude towards them. But the incidents that have taken place over the last few months make it incumbent upon me to express things in a very clear-cut manner. They say that one of the leaders of this country before the Six-Day War, they said about the old city, who needs that Vatican on their heads? I'm not sure if there is truth embedded in that, but that reality has proven to us that that leader erred when he said that. There are hundreds of thousands, millions of pilgrims who have come to the Western Wall after the liberation, have definitely needed it. That was all that interested them. What is this sanctity? What does it mean? It means a differentiation. It means something so unique. After all, we sanctify our wives under the canopy when we wed them. We sanctify the wine, and we turn an ordinary mundane meal into an elevated Friday night, some unique feeling. After all, this sanctification elevates and differentiates from one place totally to another, from one time to another time. This sanctity acts within reality. It takes the mundane, everyday lives and elevates it to different spheres. It tells you what is beyond you and above you. After all, we can soar. There are nearly 11 million visitors every year to the Western Wall, the second most holy place to the Jewish people. They come in order to meet and encounter that sanctity. Of course, they visit in the Western Wall tunnels, and they have their photograph taken, and they listen to the stories. But all this is in the background of the real thing, because of which they have come here. All that is dwarfed when you talk of that one moment when in that moment a man lays his forehead against those ancient stones and whispers a prayer from the book of Psalms or straight from his heart, and he buries the little prayers and requests and hopes within the niches and the nooks and crannies of the wall, more so than the Masada or any other holy site in Israel, and not because of archaeology, but because of this sacred element, this sanctity. And therefore, a holy site is also an ancient site. It has archaeological values, and it is incumbent upon us to preserve it, to protect it, and to learn about it. But it is not an archaeological site. A holy site is not only for that freezing and preservation. It is not a place that distances people from it. It is not something that is surrounded by ropes that cannot be touched. We do not reach those holy sites and touch them because of their past, but because of our present. We come to bow our heads and pray and to beg of our God, to thank and receive some kind of consolation and strength. We come at that sensitive moment, and not only because of what happened in the past, and that holy site ought to be open for everyone at every time, every hour. Such a holy site, whether it is 2,000 years old from the days of yore, is actually in the present. It is not in the past. We come not to actually look upon it, but to touch it, to absorb it, to be impacted and influenced by it. We do not come only in order to discover stones, but we come first and foremost to discover our roots. The archaeological research in the state of Israel has created something which is unique. It succeeded in bridging over 2,000 years of exile and distance and create an encounter between the new generation of Jews with its patriarchs, with its forefathers. Not only here in Jerusalem, but we discover warm regards from David and Solomon, from the Maccabees and from Bar Kochva. And archaeology actually it refutes those voices that call us an occupying force, because it is excavating a land that was ostensibly occupied by other people and captured, and it discovers coins and writings that were in the mikvehs and the purification sites, and those who distort it and those who call that as something and try and refute it. After all, this is a very rare, precious treasure that needs to be cherished for prosperity and for posterity and our future generations. And of course, this is about all the holy signs, but most specifically about the Western Wall. When it was liberated in the Six-Day War, the first thing that they did was enable access for those who came to pray. That was a Jewish choice, who understood that the role of a holy site is that it should be open for every single person and not a closed museum site. And through that understanding, at the Western Wall, such an archaeological excavation enterprise could grow and blossom. After all, the Cardo's discovery and all the stones that were excavated from all the periods and eras, throughout these entire years, they succeeded in continuing with all the millions that were visiting at the same time, because they understood that the archaeological role of research in a holy site was so specific, and they succeeded in creating these things simultaneously. But those voices that we hear nowadays and what we know would not have succeeded without that having happened. Unfortunately, to my chagrin, what was accepted by our forefathers has now been totally clashed and collapsed. After all, there are few archaeologists who speak against that. The objection to have actually a kind of prayer compound or prayer rooms and studies or even bathrooms that would be for the well-being of those who come to pray. They are objecting to so many people and their objections of these archaeologists and the architects as if it is more important to them than the living person. And as our sages once said, it is a topsy-turvy world. After all, those who remain in silence. I heard other voices as well, that we're not talking about a Western Wall, but rather the Temple Mount. And it was not by chance that I said is that the Western Wall is the second most holiest of sites. The most holiest for all is, of course, the location of the temple where the Shekhinah took place. And although I object to the ascent of Jewish people to Temple Mount, and I never have ascended it, because I say, but still, that sanctity actually dictate my life, and I prayed that we should be able to see that mercy and foresee it and actually sense it, and therefore, we will always remain and pray to our God. And what Muslims have done in the past, they are deliberately erasing archaeological findings. And I am not accepting that theory that no one is saying anything when we're talking about Temple Mount. There are no sort of anonymous objections in the newspapers. There aren't any scholastic letters written to the planning commissions. Those archaeologists know how to protest an ostensible. Any archaeological excavation beside the Western Wall say nothing when they talk, when the Temple Mount is mentioned. And I do not accept those that the Jews do in the Temple Mount, claiming that it is their own. I know how complex it is. I grapple and contend with it, and I am attacked by all those various radical groups, but I will not give in to their intimidation and their threats. But on the other hand, let us now counter one thing against the other. Yes, the sanctity of the Western Wall could possibly be a political obstacle in the eyes of a future state. In that position, after all, thousands of people who pray there find it very difficult to partition Jerusalem. Yes, 11 million visitors every single year are a Herculean, in fact, obstacle for politicians and for peace. But unfortunately, there are so many political sort of motivation that dictate their opinions. Where people live, then yes, we do excavate because they say there is life. But where you want to build life, there suddenly people say stop the digging and the excavation. So this political line, they want to turn into a professional opinion. The Israel Antiquities authorities should be appreciated and admired for their professional stand, despite the fact that people perhaps do not always agree, and they do not always agree with me. But that is something that is acceptable. That is the complex reality that we have to contend with every single day, day in, day out, the Western Wall. But to change that reality and to turn it from a holy site into an archaeological site, from a place of life to a place of a monument, a memory, a museum of antiquities, that attempt to disconnect it, the Western Wall, from its sanctity and distance those millions of people who came because of its sanctity, it is not acceptable. The Western Wall is a sacred place. It is holy for those who come to visit it, for the Jewish people, and holy and sacred for the people of Israel, the state of Israel, but for other religions as well. But first and foremost, it must serve the the millions of pilgrims who come to it. It must give it a cover from sun and ray. It must supply its needs when they come to this sacred site. They should have ushers and guides, technical workers there. There should be bathrooms, toilets. There should be the minimal needs. It should be open 24/7, 365 days a year, and still supply every visitor that feeling as if they are a one and only, because it is not only an archaeological site, but a holy, sacred site. And to every holy site, it makes that person stand out as alone and single and individual in the eyes of their God. So just as the holiest of holies, there is always a perpetual candle that actually is a light there so that people can come and pray there, the same place where their foremothers and fathers prayed thousands of years ago. And if, please God, their daughters and granddaughters will come back to pray there. Archaeological research has exposed that specific place. Those women and those men are rejuvenating it, reviving it, and that is that encounter between archaeology and sanctity.